Thank you for joining us today. I am happy to hear most schools have made it through a very disrupted semester and are starting to look at how we're going to face another semester with some challenges as well. In today's webinar, I wanted to take the opportunity to give an overview of what LabStats does, as well as spend time discussing how schools are using the LabStats Remote Access Dashboard in their efforts to provide access to campus resources to their students remotely. We have a mix of people that are LabStats customers as well as some that are not. So if there's anything that's a review, that may be for people that are unfamiliar with LabStats. So jumping in to get started, LabStats is a client that gets installed on your campus machines, and that client will report back into our interface exactly what's happening on those machines. So for instance, on the screen, you can see that we are tracking 251 computers, and of those, 92 of them are currently in use by students. 38 of them are powered on, connected to the internet, ready to go, and 121 of those are not connected to the internet. And so that data, that the client also pulls data off of those computers. So for instance, it will say which user is using that computer and what they're using it for. It will pull the metadata off of those computers. So it will include the IP address, host name, MAC address, things like that. And it will also pull a software inventory so you can see exactly what is installed on those computers. Then all of that live data gets stored within the LabStats database, and you can run reports on historical usage of those computers. So you can see, for instance, which computers are getting used the most often with the login summary by station. You can use the usage history and peak usage history to determine if you have enough computers in a computer lab, or if you have some that you can get rid of. The application launch history will help you understand if you have the correct number of licenses to manage the application history, things like that. So these reports can help with a lot of the questions about deployment of the resources on campus. It also gives the ability to merge that live information with a background image and create a map that gives live computer availability. So in this example, anywhere that there's a computer that is in blue with the little icon, it would indicate that that computer's in use. If it's green, it's connected to the internet and available for use. And if it's gray, it just means that it's not connected to the internet. And those are useful tools as far as helping students understand where resources are available in real time and making sure that they can find what they need. When the pandemic hit, we came back to basics with LabStats to determine what resources we have that can help. And what we focused in on is this live dynamic map or list of computers that are available and are not currently in use. Combining that list with the metadata that the client is pulling makes it pretty straightforward for us to create a dashboard that gives a list of the computers that are available to be connected to remotely. And so there's three primary things that our customers are accomplishing with this. Number one is with the pivot to remote learning models and things like that, a lot of those resources can be virtualized, but it is expensive. And so they're helping defray some of the cost of that by providing access to what you've already purchased. The second thing is some of the software cannot be virtualized. So animation software, CAD software, statistical analysis, a lot of the like Creative Cloud, things like that cannot be virtualized. And so you either need to provide access to the computers on campus, or you need to be able to give each student an individual license, which would also be cost prohibitive. The third thing is, even if you could provide a license for every student, it would depend on the student having equipment robust enough to run and manage that software package. The obvious example is, can you run CAD on a Chromebook? And the answer to that overall is no. And that Chromebook can be used to connect to a computer on campus that does have that processing power, and therefore you make those resources available to students that have very limited equipment. So with this example, where that is a live dynamic list, if this art lab computer were to be logged into, it would drop off the list and no longer be available for somebody else to come connect to. If a computer were to lose an internet connection, again, it's not going to be available for use remotely, and so it would drop off the list. The connection is something that you would need to put together. Most of the customers that we have are using a VPN connection that's baked into Windows, or a VNC connection that's in the Mac computers. And I'll show you a couple of examples of the most common configurations of that. But the LabStats part of this is creating this dynamic list that directs traffic, and then your team would be responsible to make sure that that connection is working according to your security protocols, your network outlay, and using the resources that you already have. For instance, when I say resources, you may already have, some schools already have a VPN connection, such as one example is Western Michigan University. On their website, they have a page that explains to students how to connect to their VPN. And then when students follow these steps, they can click to select an available computer. And when they click this button, it reflects back to the dynamic list from LabStats so that they can complete that connection. Western Michigan University has also included drop-down tabs that will surface what software is available in each of those groups, so that students can verify that the computers they select out of this lab are going to have the resources that they need before they even log in. So this is the most common type of configuration if you're going to be using a VPN. Some schools are, because of the expense of the VPN, or if they don't already have one set up, they're using just that remote desktop or the VNC connections. And so this is an example from State University of New York, Cortland, that they have just used that VPN, or the remote desktop connection. So they have a little tab that they can click on in order to surface what software is available there, that they've just put that in that header bar so that students can verify that the computers have what they need. And then when they hit this connect option, it prompts them to download the RDP file. And when they click on that, it gives them the alert that they are connecting to a computer remotely. And then they are using an RD gateway server in order to direct traffic onto their into their network, and that also allows them to maintain the core of their security protocols with the sign-on and the username and password sign-on requirements. And so this is becoming one of the most popular configurations because it is straightforward to set up, and it's not cost preventative. Other considerations that we would have for security is schools are using where they publish this link as part of their layered security. So what happens with setting this up is LabStats, our support and our development group, will create this dashboard for you, and then you would be able to work with them to configure that connection. And so we host that URL. Where you publish that URL is something that you would need to decide how you're going to do for best fit with your network environment, your security protocols, things like that. In some cases, we have schools that are creating multiple dashboards. If you have a lab that is controlled access, for instance, if you have an engineering lab that only engineering students are allowed to access, we could create a dashboard for your engineering department that would be deployed specifically, or that link would be shared specifically with the engineering students, and not to the general student population. And you may have a second dashboard that is your open access that is published to all students. And so those are things that help direct traffic as well. So those were a couple of examples. As far as setting this up for anybody that is a LabStats customer, this is included at no additional charge at all. So we're not trying to make money off the pandemic or anything like that. What you would need to do is you look at your groups. And so you have your computers arranged based on location. So usually by lab. You would look at your groups and determine which ones of those groups you want published on that remote access dashboard. From there, you would go to the lab tools section, the remote access, and there is I'm going to disable that so I can re-enable it. There is a form that you would need to submit to request your remote access dashboard there. And that tool or that form pretty much asks you to put in your contact information if you're a customer, if you're using LabStats Cloud or on-prem versions, and then how you anticipate providing access, whether it's using a VPN, RDP, VNC, and then any special instructions that you would want to have, you would put in this bottom box to which groups you want to be included on that dashboard. If there are multiple dashboards that you need, you would need to denote that there. And once you hit submit, within a business day, you're going to get that URL back with some additional instructions on configuration of that connection. And then you can work with our support group of making sure that that connection works according to, again, your network, your security protocols, things like that. And then you would have the opportunity to test that. And when it's all ready and configured, you can publish those URLs to allow students to access those computers remotely. For those that are not a LabStats customer, we would need to set you up for a trial in order to test this out, and we're happy to do so. If you are in the United States, you would contact me, Tyler, at labstats.com. If you are outside of the United States, you would need to reach out to Ben. He's our international account executive, and he would be able to set you up on that trial. To deploy the trial, you would just go in and after we got it set up, you would invite any additional users that are part of the project. To invite a user, you just select invite user, put in their name, their email address, and then if you want them to be able to work on the configuration of LabStats, you would give them administrator access. If you want them to just view and run reports and things, you can give them viewer access. But once everybody is invited and you establish your groups, then you would be able to request that remote access tool. Now, moving forward, we have schools that are starting to make their plans on how are we going to return to campus. The pivot from on-campus activity to remote access, remote learning models was a very substantial project, but it was straightforward in the fact that everybody was going in the same direction. All resources were being diverted away from campus. The return to campus is likely to be much more complex. Schools are talking about mixed model where students will be able to choose whether they want to go to class online, whether they want to come to campus. So the return to campus may be phased, not only in the students, but also in resource availability. For instance, your computer labs may require social distancing protocols, and your computers may not be 6 feet apart, which means that you have two options: to either only utilize half of your resources by only letting students use every other computer, or you would have to package half those computers up, rewire another room, and double your geographical footprint of your labs in order to spread those computers out. What we are having some schools planning on doing is using that. So for instance, if we were to come into one computer lab, you could take every other computer and make it available either on-site or remote access. So you would break this lab into two groups. So you would have on-site computer, remote access, on-site, remote access, and basically you would just need to remove the keyboard for those remote access computers so that students don't sit down and start using those on-site, and it would allow you to provide access to half of those computers on site and the other half you would make available remotely. That way it decreases your workload and you are still making all of those resources available. When you start to see more students returning to campus and those social distancing protocols are either relaxed or whatever the scenario is, you would just be able to go into the station manager and move those computers back over from the remote access onto your on-site groups, and you would be able to compare the utilization of those computers remote access versus on-site. And you would also be able to adjust to make sure that you have enough resources available in either scenario, whether all of the computers are being used on campus or remotely. Another consideration is this is an opportunity to expand the availability of computer resources without incurring any additional cost. Engineering lab, as an example, if that lab closes at 8 p.m., you would be able to provide 24-hour access to that lab just by allowing access after 8 p.m. to remote users. And so schools are using that in order to help improve the availability of resources without an additional expense. Some schools are even providing access to these resources campus-wide by allowing students to remote into computers that have specialty software from an open computer lab. The upside to that is it allows you to provide access campus-wide to very, very specific resources. The downside is that they would potentially be using 2 computers simultaneously on campus. They would be using the computer in the open computer lab as well as the computer in either the restricted access lab or the specialty lab. Those are some of the things that schools are doing to use this tool for the immediate scenario where almost all users are going to be off campus, as well as helping to plan a complex return to campus and make sure that those resources are available in a slightly more flexible manner. So that's the bulk of the information as far as the overview there. It looks like we've had a couple of questions that have come in, so I'm going to turn it over to Brett and let him kind of bring those questions up and we can address those.
All right, so we have a number of questions that have come in, Tyler. The first one is from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, if someone logged in remotely, is there a message on the screen to let a walk-up student know it's being used? Also, can it be locked out with a message screen?
We don't currently have a mechanism to do that. For the schools that are splitting the access of those so that the computers in a lab may be available remote or on-site, they're changing some of their lock screens to indicate this computer is available for remote access. It is not to be used from on campus. We're working on different options as far as to see if that is something that is a feature we can add down the road. However, it is not currently available and we don't have any timeline on if it would be.
We had a question come in through the webinar chat. It's from Florentine Overco, and she asks, did you say that Adobe would or would not be available remotely?
The feedback that we've gotten is that students can use that to connect to Adobe. So if somebody has a Chromebook remotely, they would be able to log into a campus computer that has Adobe on it and be able to utilize those resources.
We've got a question from Diana Osborne, and she asks, does this dashboard live in cloud on your servers, or is it something that we would have locally?
The LabStats console, so the part that you would log into to manage it, can be, we have the option to have that in the cloud. The advantage to having LabStats in the cloud is, the obvious cloud advantages where we can auto push updates, we maintain the security, the backups, the server, all of that. Some schools do, based on security protocols, require on-prem installations only, and we do have an option for that. The pricing is exactly the same for our on-prem versus our cloud. As far as the remote access dashboard, that is something that we would host that URL through LabStats, but you would be able to publish that URL wherever it makes sense for your organization to publish that. So whether that goes on your intranet, whether it goes in your Canvas or Blackboard applications, you would be able to publish that URL as best fit for you to advertise the availability to your student population.
We've got a question from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, can computers be reserved for courses for a specific day/time?
The answer to that is that's not within the LabStats product. However, what we have had schools doing is with this, if they are using some of the side real estate on that page to say these classes are held between these hours. Initially, we had some schools that were instructors were having students message them and assign them a specific computer to log into during their class time. And so the instructors were directing that traffic, and it was very labor intensive. What they have reverted to using LabStats is saying during this specific time frame, when the students log in, they just come to this dashboard, they select an available computer from the classroom that they would normally be attending class in physically, and selecting a computer from that group. And so while there's nothing that would prevent that from happening within our remote access dashboard, usually notifying students of when those resources are available, and that lab has resolved a large part of it. And then there are options within group policy and within the remote desktop configuration that do restrict access. Those are not LabStats products, so we can't offer too much support on that, but we can point you in the right direction if those are things that that you may want to do. There may be an option within that group policy that will help you to do that as well.
We have a question from Vicky Morris. She asks, what about software such as Avid Media Composer or other Avid products?
I'm not familiar specifically with the Avid products. However, with basically what's happening is it is as if the student is sitting at the computer with that remote connection. And so if that product and that software runs well natively from the computer when a student's there, it should work from the remote connection as well. There are going to be some restrictions that you may need to keep in mind, such as printing. The student may need to be aware that if they print to a local printer, that local printer may be on campus. And then if they save to a local drive, it may be saving to a local drive on campus. And so they need to be aware of that so that they can make sure that they print and save to the appropriate locations.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, they say Mac screen sharing via VNC, Mac screen sharing activity is mirrored locally. What are the security considerations for displaying a student's activity on the screen while they are not physically in front of it? What happens if they forget to log out and leave their session in progress?
Okay, those are some considerations that I'm going to defer over to our support group, because as you get that connection configured, if there are additional configurations that you want to make within those connections, our support group can help you with how things get handled in those scenarios. And so I'm not familiar with the specifics. Talk to your support representative while you're setting it up, and they can answer those technical questions.
We have another question. I apologize in advance. I'm going to butcher your name. We have a question from Gol Kasim. And he asks, if we have 200 systems of virtual lab, can we use LabStats for students?
Um, LabStats does work with virtual machines as well. I refer to support because we would want to do that on a trial to verify, because with virtual, any VDI environment, they're not standardized. So we want to make sure that the configuration is going to work in order to track those resources. And then we would also need support in our development group to verify that those remote connections would work. And so I defer those questions over to our support group as well.
We've got another question from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, what are the advantages of LabStats over Sassafras Key Reporter?
The big difference there is LabStats was developed and built as a tool for higher education IT. And so it's very focused in our deployment as far as our reporting. The way that it works is based on feedback from higher education, where Sassafras it was originally built as a software licensing management tool. And so the approach is a little bit different. So that's the short answer. If you do want to do the comparison, go ahead and take a look. We're confident that we stack up very well with our interface, with our customer support, and our pricing is going to be very, very competitive. And we pretty much are the thought leaders in the higher education space. And theirs is a little bit more focused on the software licensing end of things.
We have another question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, is there a limit on the number of URLs that can be requested? Is the recommended model one URL per restricted use lab?
That's something that we would want to discuss with you. Like, there's not a limit on the number. However, if you're just wanting to provide one computer or something like that, that may be a better fit to just provide a direct connection. Like faculty and staff computers as an example, it's a one-to-one assignment. And so rather than publishing a dashboard, a lot of the IT teams are just providing access to that one computer for the staff member. But as far as the number of remote access dashboards, we don't have a limit on that. We would want to work with you on your configuration to make sure that it's working for you.
All right, we have no more active questions in Q&A or in chat. Oh, we just got a few. So Jessica Daniel asks, can you do anything with the data pulled from machines in bulk, i.e. reporting how many machines are running, etc.?
Within the dashboard for LabStats, there are or within the reports, there are several different ways to get the data. Typically, people just come to our report screen and they run those reports, and you can get, so for instance, if you were going to do a login summary by station, you can configure the date, the number of stations, and the users that you're looking at. So for instance, with all stations, you could choose to run a report on an individual computer lab, a departmental basis. You can even tag stations. And so if you wanted to get a list of all computers, their login history based on the ones that are wheelchair accessible, for instance, you would be able to filter those reports. And so the configurations to get the data out of the reports will depend on the question you're trying to answer. We also do have an API list for those that are wanting to integrate that data into business intelligence tools or things like that. And so the ways to get the data out of LabStats are varied. We want to make sure that the data is available to you in what works best for you. And we'd be happy to do a walkthrough with you and show you exactly what's going to work for your specific environment.
And we have another question from Gol Kasim. Once again, I'm sorry. I'm confident that's not how you pronounce your name, but he's asking for a trial version to test in his environment. And so we'll follow up with you directly after the webinar in regards to that.
And absolutely, like I said previously, if you're in the United States, reach out to me, Tyler at labstats.com. They'll put our contact information up before the webinar closes. If you are not in the United States, reach out to Ben. And then if you're already a LabStats customer, Schofield is going to be the point of contact to that we can give you any tutorials. We can help you get things set up and answer any questions you may have there.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, is there a kiosk that can be set up on campus so students can see all computers in several buildings for when we finally go back?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that is great on the LabStats, I'm just going to show you this really quickly. People will use the lab maps in order to display those the computer availability. You can display a single lab similar to what I did, but you can also use a carousel viewer. And so if you select 2 or however many different labs you want, I'm going to put this as a really fast, 4-second for display purposes. But basically you would be able to publish this HTML without touching anything. Every 4 seconds it would rotate through and show the live computer availability. And with this, I also picked out a couple of different examples as to how those maps can be created. They can either be a photo, they can be a diagram, they can be something that doesn't have a background image at all, which is just going to show the raw computer availability in real time. The other thing that I didn't mention previously is we also have a mobile app called Lab Find. Lab Find is going to take that live computer availability information, add in the software inventory information. So if a student pulls into campus from their phone on that mobile app, they would be able to say, I need a computer that has Photoshop on it, and it will filter out the computers based on proximity to their cell phone, labs that are currently closed, computers that are currently in use in the software inventory, and it will say there are 10 computers that have Photoshop available within a 10-minute walk of you. They're in these 2 computer labs, and then when they select a computer lab, it will actually navigate them to the building that that lab is located in. And so it takes a lot of that you can strategically deploy your software instead of making sure that it's deployed globally. You can actually reduce that deployment and still have a mechanism to help students find it when they need it, which is going to be a potential cost savings for you. So we have the mapping ability that you can put that on a console or a kiosk, or if you have signage that has internet connectivity, you could put it on there. You can integrate it into the website. Then you can also provide the mobile app. So we've got several mechanisms to help publish what's in use and what's available in real time.
So we've got another question from anonymous attendee, but before we jump into that, I wanted to point out to our attendees that we've posted some links in the Zoom webinar chat. If you have questions that are not covered in the Q&A, or if you want to get in touch with a member of our team directly, we have links on there to connect you with Tyler or Ben if you're outside of the US. And then we also have a link for current customers to connect with Josh Schofield, our customer success manager. And then finally, we've linked a frequently asked questions article that covers a lot of information that common questions that people have about the remote access dashboard. And so with that, we have another question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, can RDP access be enabled or disabled for systems via the LabStats interface, or does that need to be done by group policy? In other words, can I easily turn off remote access when I have an in-person class scheduled?
That is something that you would possibly be able to do through group policy as far as scheduling that. But again, that's not part of the LabStats tool. As far as the ability to add or remove stations from that remote access dashboard, you would be able to manage that by adding or removing computers from the individual groups. So that's probably not something that you're going to want to do on a individual basis for classroom time to remove those before a class so that they're not available remotely. Again, talk with our support group as far as best practices on how others have managed that problem and see what others have done. But that's being able to just restrict the access to that dashboard based on hours and schedules is not something that's currently included in the dashboard.
Okay, we have no active questions in the Q&A right now. We'll go ahead and leave it open for a little while, just in case anyone has any lingering questions, and we'll respond to them as they come in.
And thank you everyone for attending. We greatly appreciate it. Hopefully this is a resource that will be helpful as you guys are returning to campus, as well as helping navigate social distancing, stay healthy and safe. If you would like more information, please reach out to us, schedule a walkthrough. We can talk about specific questions, specific configurations, and hopefully be a useful resource for you and your team. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to be in touch.
We have another question just now, Tyler. Marcia Macias asks, can you disable a lab completely and then enable it again?
As far as that goes, I'm trying to think through that. We would need to look at that and possibly check with support, because as far as the remote access dashboard itself, that would have to be reconfigured. Down the road, you'll be able to add or remove those within the LabStats console itself. But again, going in and doing that on a manual basis just for a class or something like that may be time consuming or a hassle. So schedule a call and we'll talk about exactly what you're hoping to accomplish with that, and we'll discuss the different options and hopefully come up with something that'll work.
We've got a question from an anonymous attendee.
Yep.
They ask, can you please provide a bit of detail about the application's usage report?
The application's usage report, let's see. I'm going to pull the screen back really quickly. Okay, so the application usage report, there's a couple of different application reports that worked depending on the question you specifically have. One of my favorite reports is the application launch history, which allows you to, like, I'm going to leave this at 1 month, all stations. But if you wanted to look at a single application, or if you wanted to look at a group of applications. So the one that I like to use, for instance, is statistical analysis. You can look and compare different applications that are accomplishing a similar task. So for instance, with this, you're going to be comparing 5 different things that do statistical analysis. The most common ones on campus are like SPSS and R. Faculty and staff love SPSS because they're familiar with it. Students love R because it's free and they don't yet have a particular affinity towards one or another. And with this, you would be able to see the usage, the total usage per day or per week. But you would also be able to see the maximum concurrent usage. And what I really like about this is if you were to look at Minitab, for instance, you can see in the last month that we have had a maximum of 3 people using that software at any given time. However, if we come to the application manager and we look up Minitab, you can see that it is downloaded on 199 computers. So you're paying for 199 licenses in order to service 3 at one time. Now, that is very frustrating data unless you have a mechanism to help students understand exactly where those licenses are. With the lab maps, the lab find, you would be able to deploy those licenses in one computer lab and and even potentially make that computer lab available remotely campus-wide, but you would be able to, instead of deploying on 199 computers, you would be able to reduce that to 20 computers and provide access to it, but still direct students to it when they need it. It also helps decide if you have the right licensing model, whether you need to change from a seat license to a site license or the other way around. It gives you the opportunity to see exactly what's being used. Other reports, such as your application sessions report and your application usage history reports, are going to help you understand what's being used by whom and where in a slightly different way. And I would be happy to dig into those in a lot more detail if you wanted to schedule a walkthrough with me, because we can definitely help understand exactly what's being used and where.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, what personal data, if any, is stored in your system hosted in the USA?
As far as personal data, what we are collecting is the user information. And so whatever you are having them use to sign on with. And so that's pretty much it. If you have already obfuscated that or have an anonymized user where they're using just a campus ID or something like that, then it's already absolutely in compliance with even the most stringent privacy laws, if that's what you're referring to. We are CCPA, GDPR, FERPA compliant. And the reason is that we're not collecting, we're not selling or distributing any personal information other than their username. We do have mechanisms that you can anonymize that, and I can actually discuss that with you if you wanted to schedule a call or a walkthrough as to what options we have there. In most cases, the policies of use guidelines that the students agree to at the beginning of the semester basically alert them that you would potentially track their activity on computers on campus in order to enforce your use guidelines, and those use contracts are more than what is required in order for you to be able to collect this type of data within LabStats. And as far as access to that data, we never sell any user data. And the only way that even somebody at LabStats would access is in support of your technical questions. And so the data is very secure, and we can also send you, if you would like, you can find it on our website under this, if you just do LabStats privacy policy, and you'll be able to find it on our website.
Tyler, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, if a computer is asleep, can the student select that computer and have it wake up or wake on LAN or other means so they can use it?
I am not sure on that one, so I would need to, you can either follow up with me, shoot me an email, Tyler, Tyler at labstats.com, and I will look into that with our support group, or you can reach out to them directly by emailing support@labstats.com. And so I'm not entirely sure on that one.
All right, so it looks like we're not getting any more active questions into the Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and end the webinar now. For those of you who might still have additional questions, please just reach out to the appropriate contact displayed here on the screen, and we'll be more than happy to dive deep on any questions you might have. Thank you very much for attending today, and we hope to talk with you soon.